Style for Life. I'm Stephanie Rumble, fashion stylist, accountability coach, and your guide to feeling good in your body and your clothes. Based in Christchurch, New Zealand, I bring over 3 decades of experience in fashion, fitness, and wellness to help you feel strong, stylish, and self-assured. Together we'll explore the emotional, physical, and practical sides of style, because true confidence starts from within. No matter your age or size, you deserve to feel confident and show up as the best version of you. I truly believe this. This is Style for Life. Kia ora everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. And this week I'm very excited to have a guest on the podcast, a lovely guest I've known for a few years called Clara Fergus. She is actually going to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about who she is and what she does. But thank you first of all, Clara, for agreeing to join me today on the podcast.
You are so welcome, Steph. It's a pleasure to catch up with you, and it's been a long time coming, so it's nice that we could finally make it happen.
Sure. So tell us a bit about who you are and what you do and why you think we've decided to have a conversation today.
Absolutely. So yes, my name's Clara, as Steph said, and I know Steph through our connection to running, which is great. So running the DGRS club with Steph. But perhaps more importantly as to why Steph got me on the podcast today is that I'm doing my PhD currently in the world of diabetes and diabetes research. So I've worked as a diabetes dietitian through to Whataora or Health New Zealand for the past 5 years, and I recently started my PhD October. Well, it's not so recent now, Steph. Time goes so quickly. But I'm about a year and a bit into my PhD,
Wow.
looking at diabetes and the world of technology and kind of the effect that diet has on all of that.
What? It's interesting, Cara, because it's a big step. You're already a dietitian. You're already working in the area of diabetes. She's an amazing runner too, by the way. She's run such a fast half marathon just this weekend in Bulla, didn't you, Clara? Sorry, I had to pull that one out. Tell us what time you did, just so people who run half marathons can just go, oh, what did you run?
Oh, well, it was a personal best, but it was a 1:22.03 or something like that. Yeah.
So fast. And just to give context, what pace per kilometre is that?
That is 3 minutes and 53 seconds per kilometre. Oh, yeah.
See, I think if I could even be a minute quicker than that, I would have been so stoked, and I was not. I was more than a minute slower than that, not quicker.
Slower.
A minute slower. And I was more than a minute slower. And so, it's exceptional. You're an exceptional athlete as well as a very talented dietitian as well, Clara. So what motivated you to, as I said, we're working as a dietitian, life's trucking along. Why did you want to actually go into a PhD and study? Because it's such a big deal and such a huge commitment, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's like a really honest answer, and then I think there's an answer, that probably speaks more broadly. I think if we start with the more broad answer, working as a dietitian is very one-on-one, and you'd know this, Steph, with the work that you do. Like when you're seeing people one-on-one, it's amazing, right? You build this real rapport with people. You've got the ability to kind of have quite a big impact on someone's life, or hope to, but you can feel like you're starting to do the same thing a little bit from day to day. And so to be able to go, okay, I would like to be able to take a step back and look at what impact we can have on a greater level. I think it comes to a time where you start seeking that out, perhaps. And so this for me was like a nice turning point where I'd kind of gotten to the point where I was feeling really happy in my work and feeling really confident with what I was doing. But there were little tells, like it might be, a new article's been released, and we're so busy at the hospital, you don't necessarily get time to sit down and read a new article about what the latest treatment option is, or what the latest diet is, and whether that's got any impact on anything. So for one thing, I think further research allows you to just have that time to read and to think. So that was definitely a big driver, as well as, just to be able to, have a broader impact. So that's kind of my nice glamorous answer. And then I think if I'm also being really honest to myself, I mean, I'm careful on how I say this, but naturally I'm not a massive empathetic person.
Mm.
So I think when you're seeing people and you're counseling people during the day, you've only got so much resource. And so it's nice to be able to have a little break from that, step back. And I was getting to my end of my days, and Tom, my partner, would say, how was your day? And I'd say, just give me 2 hours to have some time to myself, and then I'll talk to you about my day. And I didn't really want to show up like that in my personal life. So I just thought it was time for a change. And yeah, this was something that was really appealing to me, to be able to kind of have a little bit more me time and not necessarily need to give as much of my empathy to others.
Yeah.
And that aren't kind of in my immediate circle.
You are very empathetic, and I totally relate to that. You're very giving, and in the conversation with, when you do talk to Clara, you feel very engaged, like you're really very much present in there. So I totally get that. And I get it from my perspective too. You know, one of the reasons I mix my work up so much is because if you are doing that one-on-one thing all the time, it is quite emotional, and it's just a drain on your resources. So it's good, and it's good to be able to refill your cup. And I think, you know, this is going to have a big impact. You're doing such great work. So you're studying. So just tell our audience a little bit about what diabetes is, maybe, because there's obviously different types of diabetes, and then we'll go from there about what you're studying and how it all falls out.
Yeah, good starting point. So I guess when we talk about diabetes, firstly, there are so many misconceptions about diabetes. And so I think it's really great to be able to have these sorts of conversations and just be really honest. So when we talk about diabetes, I guess there are commonly known types of diabetes in New Zealand. So diabetes in general kind of talks about an insufficiency of insulin. And insulin is the hormone that's needed to be able to absorb carbohydrates from the food that we eat. And so when we don't have enough insulin, or the insulin's not working properly, the carbohydrates from the food that we eat, they don't get utilized by the cells, so they just kind of sit in the blood, and you run with high sugar levels, high blood glucose levels, and that can have all sorts of complications. In the short term, you just feel quite sick, might need to go to the toilet a lot, you know, might be feeling lightheaded or tired, or your body's not utilizing those carbohydrates. And so a lot of people will maybe notice that they start to lose a little bit of weight, or they might end up in hospital. And then over time, we realize, well, what is the cause of that insulin not working properly? Is it like type 1 diabetes, where we might have, you know, a condition whereby something's been activated in the body and the pancreatic cells have started to sort of eat away or become deficient, and the body stops producing that insulin altogether? Or is it perhaps a case where, you know, for some reason the pancreatic cells have been overworked and they're starting to reduce the amount of insulin that they're producing? Or, you know, maybe there's a little bit of resistance to that insulin from, you know, fat buildup and that sort of thing. And so that would lead us to think more down that type 2 diabetes route. And there are lots of other different types of diabetes, you know, that might come from losing your pancreas in an accident, or cancer or something like that. But yeah, type 1 and type 2 diabetes are two of the most commonly talked about. And then gestational diabetes, which might present a little bit similarly to type 2 diabetes, where there's that worn out or the resistance to insulin, but it's typically associated with pregnancy and all the hormonal changes that are going on there.
And so how, if you were to discover you had type 1 diabetes, when is that likely to happen, and what's the potentially the genetics around that, or, you know, how does type 1 evolve, or tell us a bit about that.
Most people would either present in two ways. Via the GP, they would have been starting to feel off. And it's really sad. Like, some people might have been feeling really off for a really long time and put it down to other things, like we're so good at doing. You know, not sleeping properly, feeling tired, losing weight. Yeah, that, as I said, needing to go to the loo all the time. And then you go to the GP, and the GP would probably do what we call like a point of care blood glucose, or see what the glucose levels are, and it'll probably be high. They might take an HbA1c, which is a test that tells us what the average glucose is over the last 3 months, and then they'll pretty quickly refer you into a specialist centre. Or people will end up in hospital in what we know as diabetic ketoacidosis. So if the body can't use that blood glucose or the glucose in the blood, then it starts to break down fat for energy. And one of the byproducts of that is like an acid level that makes people feel really, really unwell, normally nausea, vomiting, and can end up in hospital.
So do we usually discover we're type 1 diabetic early in life? Would that be more typical?
If you present with diabetes at a young age, and so like less than 25, it would be more common for that diagnosis to be type 1. Just not necessarily because type 1 is more common in young age, but because type 2 is a lot more uncommon in young age. But although that's changing, and we're starting to see more people with type 2 diabetes diagnosed younger, which I guess we'll talk more about why that is. So yeah, I actually could not tell you, Steph, off the top of my head, the average age for being diagnosed with type 1, but I know that in the clinic here, we'll see people from all sorts of ages. It can develop quite late in life as what we call like slowly evolving sort of type 1 diabetes. So
what's the
all age ranges.
And what's the difference between the two types of diabetes? When you're diagnosing somebody, how do you tell whether they have type 1 or type 2, and whether it's something they couldn't have helped, or whether it's something that's caused by lifestyle factors, or whether I've got that wrong?
Yeah, good question. So in people with type 1 diabetes, we will test for a certain set of antibodies. And so everyone will kind of have antibodies that will show up as negative or positive. And if they are positive, then it would indicate type 1 diabetes. And if they were negative, then likely type 2 diabetes or other types of diabetes. So that would normally be how we would first catch it. And then just trying to think what the second part of your question was.
Is it lifestyle factors that contribute more to type 1 or type 2?
Yeah, this is so interesting, because this is one of those misconceptions that I often hear, right? Is, oh, you've got the lifestyle one, or you've got the genetic one. And what is so interesting is the more that you kind of learn about type 2 diabetes, which, has typically been thought of as the lifestyle one, is that yes, there are massive lifestyle factors at play, but also there is such a big genetic element. And so if your grandma and your ma have type 2 diabetes, you're so much more susceptible to developing type 2 diabetes. And when we talk about why diabetes is increasing, so many more women are having diabetes with pregnancy. And so then that puts the baby at higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes later on as well. So yeah, there's actually sort of genetic components in both at play.
Wow. So, I've had some clients that I've worked with who have had type 2 diabetes and gestational diabetes. And actually I have worked with someone who had type 1 diabetes, so a little bit of experience as well. But typically when I'm working with accountability coaching clients, there are people whose, lifestyle has impacted their health to some degree.
Wow.
So the diabetes in some cases has been something they've had all their life, and in some cases gestational, in some cases it's developed as a result of, their health profile. So yeah, I totally relate to that. It's really interesting to know that, because I think people do beat themselves up thinking, oh, I've got type 2 diabetes, it's because of X, Y, and Z that I've done. Whereas what you're saying, just to reiterate, is that there are genetic factors in both types of diabetes, particularly even in type 2, which is something I didn't know. So, if your mother or father or maybe you're on your maternal side, if you're a female, I don't know, genetically someone else has developed it in your whānau, then the likelihood of you developing it at a certain stage of life is possible, more possible than someone who hasn't had that in their family.
Absolutely. And so when we look at these kids that are starting to get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes really early in life, like I'm predominantly working with 15 to 25-year-olds in my clinical role.
Wow.
And these poor kids are coming in with so much self-blame and so much stigma attached to the diagnosis, because there is that conception of, oh, well, you could have changed this. It's like, well, how much can a sort of 17-year-old really have changed.
Mhm.
Like that, there is so much more to that situation. So the first thing that I'm always telling people of that age is, look, this is not your fault. There are so many things that have put you at higher risk of this. And, maybe we can think about the genetics. Maybe we can think about the obesogenic environment that New Zealand has. Maybe we can think about how parenting's changed. Like, there are all these things that contribute to it that is not that kid's fault. And certainly, there are things that you can do in that first period of being diagnosed, especially, that's going to potentially reverse the diabetes diagnosis, or it's going to, reduce the likelihood of needing intensification of medicine and that sort of thing. So I think it's good people are aware of that, but also if people are sort of sitting with that blame and that stigma, that's just the saddest thing for me, because the reasons are so complex as to why that occurred in the first place.
And it's exactly the same for me in the health coaching area too. Like the reasons people come to me are not just one reason. It's not because they sat and ate chips every night. If that's what they did, and then sometimes they didn't. There's so much more to it than that. And I think that's something we in health need to be really aware of, and everyone needs to be cognizant of, that the complexity of these health issues is not just one single thing. It's a whole factor. I say to improve it, you've got to have a whole orchestra playing at once. It can't just be one section. You've got to get everything working to make it work. Have you ever wondered how you can be a fashion stylist with access to premium digital styling products? Do you want to be trained by the best in the industry and access these products that reflect fashion styling in 2025? If you do, then Image Innovators is absolutely the choice for you. This is because they have a network of over 1,000 trained fashion stylists worldwide, and when you work with them, you're getting the best of the best. They have evidence-based professional training offered by highly skilled facilitators that help you reach your absolute potential. This is a great alignment with Style for Life, as I in my business have used and endorsed their products for over 10 years with so many happy clients. And I'm really excited to say I'm also offering training to fashion stylists in conjunction with Image Innovators. So if you're ready to start your fashion styling training journey, then use the code BRIGHTRED25 for 10% off all products. So do we have an epidemic of diabetes in New Zealand, and is it type 1 or type 2 we're seeing an epidemic of?
Yeah. I mean, there is certainly like an increased prevalence of diabetes in New Zealand. I tried to pull some numbers on this. So in 2023, there are approximately 323,000 people in New Zealand estimated to have diabetes. And that was about 10% more than 2 years ago. But we do have to think a little bit about, why that might be with growing population and that sort of thing. There's this really interesting paper by this lady called Andrea Tang, and Andrea Ting, sorry. She's run some model simulations around what's the projected increase in prevalence of diabetes, and this is looking ahead 2020 to 2044. She thinks that more than 500 million people globally have diabetes, and this is projected to rise to more than 1.3 billion. So that's over double, almost triple, and by 2050.
Yeah, that's why. Why is this, Clara? Why do you think this has happened? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know. I think the article actually talks quite a lot about why, and I think once again it's complicated because there's the population growth in general.
Yes.
And then there's the aging population, and so more people perhaps are going to be sitting with that diagnosis at an older time. But then there's also no ignoring like the actual risk of developing diabetes is increasing, and there's so many reasons we could talk about as to why that is. But obesity is a really big driver of diabetes. So people living with obesity are at higher risk. There's all those genetic factors we talked about. Then there's all these political factors like disparities in access to education and access to finances for quality food, and these kind of food deserts. We talk to them as like you might go to a lower socioeconomic area, and where is the good supermarket? Like perhaps it's more likely that there are a whole lot of takeaway centres there. And so there's this perception of, well, that sort of food is cheaper for my whānau. It's easier to buy a packet of Tim Tams than it is to buy a packet of Revita crackers that you're going to put cheese on. So yeah, there are so many factors. I mean, people live busy lives, right? Like the convenience factor of this sort of discretionary food. More people perhaps are working in sedentary jobs. There's reduced time for physical activity, perhaps because more people are working, or reduced perceived time. And, screen time must be a massive one. And I also think sleep. I don't know what you see in your practice with your clients, but I just think the number of teenagers that I would see who don't go to bed until like 2 a.m. in the morning, and then they're waking up at, still for a normal day at 9. It's like you're hardly working off any sleep, and the circadian rhythm must be so impacted by that. So
how does sleep impact or increase our risk of, I mean, I know this is a big question, developing diabetes or developing that inability for our body to produce insulin? How does that impact?
I won't talk to it too specifically because I'm no means a sleep expert. One of my supervisors for my thesis has actually done her PhD in sleep and diabetes, but we know that there's a direct impact on your average glucose levels over time and a lack of quality sleep. And then I think, I mean, with yourself, like if I've had a 6-hour sleep, I'm so much more likely to pick up that sugar craving at 3 p.m. the next day because you're tired and you just want that pick-me-up. And then I think like there's some really good evidence that comes from shift workers and, how their circadian rhythm is, everyone's circadian rhythm is designed in that way where we can kind of optimally metabolize food during the day. And then when you think about, the eating that occurs, you're awake for a longer window of time.
Yes.
So then you're eating late at night and your body's not necessarily metabolizing that food in an optimal way. I think, once again, it's a loaded question.
It's such an interesting broad topic too, though, because we tend to have jumped to that judgment piece around, oh, well, if somebody's develop something like obesity, they're obviously going to develop type 2 diabetes. And in my experience, I've had friends who've been at risk for type 2 diabetes and they haven't actually had the typical risk factors. Why? We've talked about why we're more at risk, but who do you think, like you've also mentioned younger people, who else is in our vulnerable population? Who is, are we seeing here that's really you're going to have to watch out for?
Yeah, I think, of course, those people that I talked about earlier, whereby, there might be those strong genetic links with type 2 diabetes. And then when we look at, the research, unfortunately, it does tell us that, people who are Māori, Pacific populations, our Southeast Asian populations, there is the highest prevalence there. And I think the reasons that undermine that are so complicated, and it comes back to, all of that history around colonization and the maybe mistrust of health system and the impact that has sort of been laid there. So those tend to be our highest at-risk groups, both in terms of prevalence and in terms of kind of poor outcomes. So a lot of the work that's been done in New Zealand now has a real focus on those groups and what are we doing for those groups, above and beyond anyone else, which is great. You'd be hard pushed to apply for any research grant or any piece of work now without really prioritizing those groups. And the way that our healthcare system is working with access to medications and all of those things is really trying to target those at-risk groups, which is fantastic. And I'm sure there are many who I've missed, but
Gosh, it's so and so how do you think we can, like, obviously we're targeting them through research, we're targeting them through health funding and all of those things, but what kind of things do we need to be doing? Like what do you see is happening in that space to reduce the vulnerability of those groups?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to like community-based initiatives, because when we look at where the biggest benefit is in those, groups in terms of intervention, it's often comes from within those own cultures because that's where the trust is. So, I think it's a really loaded question, and I don't know what the best answer is. And also, who am I as, a privileged, able-bodied, person to advise what's best for these different cultures? Like,
Yeah, I totally hear you. And so if someone's listening to this and they think they might be at risk for type 2 diabetes or even type 1, maybe they've had some genetics or they've seen other whānau members develop it, or, they feel like some of their health choices might be, heading them in this direction, or even their doctors warned them that their markers are heading towards a diabetes diagnosis. What can people do personally to just kind of pull back those risk factors?
Those risk factors, yeah, such a good question. I mean, I would be the biggest advocate for, getting that yearly warrant of fitness in the first place, because I think, perhaps a New Zealand cultural, boast over time has been, I haven't been and seen my GP in 5 years. I haven't needed to see my GP in 10 years. And I don't necessarily think that's something that we should be advertising. We know if we can get our cholesterol levels checked, if we can get our HbA1c checked annually and catch those things earlier, we've got so much more power to be able to change the trajectory. And so absolutely getting your yearly warrant of fitness. And if something comes back of concern, then it's about finding out what your options are for help. I mean, I'm completely biased in that I would wish everyone who is at risk of diabetes could have access to, a diabetes dietitian or someone who is going to take in and compare and care and give really quality, nutrition advice. But I also know that we don't live in that ideal world. But I think finding out what, you do have access to through the GP, maybe it's a health coach, maybe there are some, good resources that you can be directed to online. And then, it's just making sure that those basic, health boxes are checked. Are you getting your 150 minutes of exercise a week at a moderate to vigorous intensity where you're actually struggling to breathe and your heart is working? Are you eating regularly across the day? Are your meals reasonably balanced with a protein source, a fat source, and a carbohydrate and vegetable? I mean, I could go on and on about the things that I think that people could be doing for themselves. Are you getting your good quality sleep in a night? And working through, well, if one of those things are lapsing, what are my priorities here? How much time do I have in a day? What are my perceived priorities? What are my actual priorities?
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of figuring out how important this change, might be to you in order to kind of improve that trajectory.
Really good advice, and so much a reflection of how I work too in the health in my accountability coaching. One of the things that came up for me working with a client some years ago was she had her indicators around diabetes were quite high. She was told that she had to do something about her lifestyle. She was actually not somebody who needed to lose weight, if that's some of my clients do need to do that, but she had a really stressful job. And she was really stressed, and she was making good food choices. She was active, and she was really close to needing to, have insulin. And she changed her job, and her stress changed, and her markers changed altogether. She didn't need it. I mean, seriously, I was gobsmacked. You've probably heard this multiple times, but it's the first time I'd really heard that. And is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. I think stress has such a massive impact on it. And I think it's so easy when you're in a job and, I don't have time for a lunch break today, or I'm so busy working. This is something I hear all the time. I'm so busy working, I don't have time to stop for lunch. And then I'll get to 3:00 and I'll have something. And then suddenly I'm ravenous, and then I want, more for the rest of the day. And so I think change of jobs, it puts all that into perspective, doesn't it? And suddenly you have that clean slate to be able to go, okay, well, what is really important here? Is it really important that I spend that extra half an hour working for someone else, or
looking after myself,
or maybe you're working for yourself, but what extra benefit are you getting from that you're not going to get by just looking after yourself first? Yes, I think that's huge. The stress is huge, and everything that surrounds that. And you can see it on people who are wearing continuous glucose monitors or glucose sensors, and we're tracking what are their glucose levels doing over time. And you'll just notice on someone's glucose monitor that their glucose are trending higher for a period of time. And it's like, oh no, that was a really stressful week at work, or someone passed away, and so I had a lot of emotions that time, or yeah, it's huge.
Do you think wearing a CGM or continuous glucose monitor is a good idea? Like, I've toyed with this myself and toyed with it from a client perspective. What's your view on this? And obviously,
Yeah.
some time for the research too, yeah.
I think it's such a fascinating concept. I've seen a lot of athletes starting to wear
Yes.
them. I think I'm a little bit in two minds. I think when you're in that position of, perhaps it's been identified that, some things have got to change. This is a really good way of being able to go, well, where do I start?
Mm-hmm.
How do I learn about what food's doing to my body? How do I learn about how exercise changes my glucose levels? But I also think there's a balance between, people who might not necessarily be needing that information, whereby too much information perhaps is not always a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And where is that line between being balanced and being healthy and then being obsessive with data? And I think on the contrary to all of this, sometimes we can have these really obsessive ideas around food or exercise, and does that sometimes feed into that? So I don't know, I'm sort of on the fence around. I think it's a great learning tool, but I don't know if it's necessarily something that I'd be recommending, outwardly for everyone.
Yeah, because it gets bantered around in my space a little bit, and I've thought about it a couple of times for people who have, I thought might be insulin resistant for whatever reason, and I have worked with people who have had PCOS, for example, and have been put, and then have had gestational diabetes, and then been put on metformin. So I think there's two more questions I want to ask you. One's about your research and the other's about what your thoughts are on the weight loss drugs. So shall we start first of all on what you're doing for your research and what you hope to achieve, and then we'll chat about the weight loss drugs.
Yeah. So those continuous glucose monitors that we were talking about, for people who are using insulin, the sensors can read the glucose levels and they can talk to insulin pumps. And insulin pumps will inject or infuse really small amounts of insulin continuously across the day, and try and mimic the job that the pancreas does in someone who would be producing insulin. And so when the sensor and the pump work together, it's what we would call a closed loop or a hybrid closed loop insulin pump system. And so my research aims to explore, well, what effect do those systems have on dietary choices? And also, how do dietary choices affect those systems? So it's kind of bidirectional. So I kind of hope that by doing that, we're creating a bit of a role for a dietitian to work within that space, trying to figure out where we sit and ensure that we're really relevant in that. And also, it's all quite new and novel. So it's just a great time to be involved in the research.
Really interesting too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're like 50%, you're halfway through the so-called PhD journey. So you're a year and a half in, you've got a year and a half to go. So we'll have to catch up with you when you're done as well and find out what you found out. Because I know that you discover things along the way, but you'll be, getting things in process as well still.
Absolutely. So one of the studies that I'm working on currently involves those medications that you talked to earlier. And so there's this big group of medications which are well known now, but they are referred to as glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, or GLP-1 RAs. And so there are now lots of different types of these medications. So some of the common ones might be Saxenda, or so Victoza or liraglutide are kind of some of the other terms used. But these medications have been in New Zealand for quite a while now. And actually, when we look at the newer types of medications, they're sort of, updates of those older models. But so they've been funded for a while now to use for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. But they're also used as a treatment for obesity, as a self-funded option. Unfortunately, we don't have the funding in New Zealand to use them routinely for obesity, but a lot of people now are paying for them. And we know that the updated or the newer models of these medications one of which is coming to the market just this week, known as tirzepatide. These medications, if you're using them consistently over 12 months, can sort of mimic the results of, earlier types to more modern types of weight loss surgery. So they're having huge impacts on people's lives, especially those living with obesity. A novel part of my research is looking at, okay, we don't routinely use weight loss medications for people with type 1 diabetes, but if we were to use them in really, really small amounts, because we know that they reduce glucose levels, that we know that they reduce insulin requirements. So if we were to use them in people with type 1 diabetes, could it help to reduce the amount of insulin that they need and make them have higher glucose time and range, meet their glucose targets, and have overall better health? So that's something that we're exploring, but more commonly and more widely they're used for people with type 2 diabetes or people living with obesity. And yeah, they're very interesting, topical, and yes, can have a great effect, I suppose, on people's lives.
What are the so when somebody's on one of the weight loss drugs, and I've had some experience with some clients as well, how long should they take them for, and when can they stop them?
Yeah, good question. So generally speaking, people would trial them for, I believe, sort of that 4 to 12 week mark. And if they weren't to notice a percentage of weight loss within that time, then they would look at coming off if they've sort of titrated up to their tolerated dose. People take them for really varying degrees of time. And I guess it's the question of, well, why are they on it in the first place? So can you think, like in the example of your client, like what was the driver of going on it in the first place?
Well, I've had a couple of people, and I think the client, a most recent client, had got to the end of a very long weight loss journey and had a little bit to go and was really struggling for that last piece, and still had some health indicators that sort of said that a little bit more weight loss might help reduce some of those health indicators, particularly around blood pressure. And the doctor had recommended that too. So I trialled it, but very, very small amount of weight loss over a 12-week period, a lot of money spent, and very, very exhausted. That was one of the side effects that this particular client noticed. And as soon as so the exhaustion was actually worse than the exhaustion that the client had experienced before they'd even started their health journey. So they'd lost a significant amount of body weight. And so the exhaustion was equivalent to being at the beginning of their health journey when their body weight body mass was much greater. So in the end, we called it and actually weaned them off because of the exhaustion, which was a side effect. And unfortunately, the food noise came in 5 times greater than it was prior to the drug. So particularly in this one client's case, it was a good opportunity to test, and this particular person was the right person for it. But it's just been, I had a couple of others who have, done a 12-week journey and lost 3 or 4 kgs and, found that good. But I think that what I'm noticing is that if you are going to try these drugs, it needs to be coupled with lifestyle change as well. And that's where I think people are going, oh, yay, hallelujah, let's take the weight loss drugs. It's just good. I can still drink loads of wine, eat lots of food, do no exercise or whatever that has caused them their health to deteriorate. And then they take the weight loss drugs, lose loads of muscle, and they lose weight on the scales, and then they come off. And
what is that weight made of? Yeah. I think you're so right. I would really strongly encourage anyone starting any of the medications, because I do think, look, they can be really successful for people. But I think seeking that support and the guidance to optimize protein, to optimize diet, to make sure you're eating regularly, and really use it as a tool, not in the toolbox, alongside, that diet and exercise that's going to help to optimize overall health, because we don't want them to be a band-aid, and what we don't want is for people to spend all that money and then come off them and they haven't addressed the behavior that might be underlying it, whether it is the the food noise, which is leading to unfavorable eating patterns, or maybe it's, I guess just not eating regularly or something, because that is the risk, right? That, you're not feeling hungry, and therefore, you're more likely to skip meals. And does that mean that you're eating healthier? I wouldn't have thought so. And so what is the risk of that when you come off? Yeah.
And I think we've noticed this too in the whole surgical weight loss area too. I've had clients who've come to me who've actually had surgical weight loss, so they've either had a gastric band or they've had sleeve or whatever has happened in their history, and they haven't really addressed the reasons why their health became critical before their surgery anyway. And then, they have the surgery, which is really effective, and they do change a lot of their health outcomes in that initial period. But then they find that, their behaviours haven't changed. So I think, we're singing from the same song sheet here about behavioural change. And I think, that comes from here, comes from how your brain works and what you've been conditioned to, and is food an emotional crutch? And gosh, you and I could talk for hours, but
yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? And where do people go though? That's the question, right? And I think this is where, as health professionals and as a health system, we fail people, because for so many people, food is an emotional crutch. And yet, what is their alternative? Like, where do people go to get the tools that they need in order to be able to cope with whatever it is that's causing that? And I don't think we have great resources in New Zealand for that. To see a psychologist, everyone would benefit, but it'd be so expensive. It's, things like that where it's like push, and that's where these can be a little bit of a Band-Aid. And so the more support we can give these people, better.
And I think, I can see you're doing that with a diabetes lens as well. Like, you're getting, people are coming to you in this space, and you're able to support and help them. And look, we have so much we could talk about, but I think we have gone to 41 minutes, which is quite a lot longer than most of my podcasts, because you're so interesting, Clara. We have talked quite substantially together prior to this when we've been running, when I've been trying to keep up with you, and when I see the easy jog at the start, I've been able to keep up with Clara. But look, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to just add as a finishing or final thought, just following this discussion?
No, I think it's a good conversation to get in people's ears, and for them to kind of go and learn more if they're interested. And there's going to be some good resources that come out, that are publicly available to support these sorts of medications and the treatment options and stuff. So use it as an entry to kind of go forth and learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if you're listening and you do want help in this health space, Clara is a diabetes dietitian. She's available through hospital, and we might put a link to how that works maybe in the show notes. And we can do that. And also we'll watch her research as it emerges, which is very exciting. And also, again, people, if you do want some help with accountability, I'm able to do that for you as well. So kia ora, and thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Clara, for agreeing to help out today on the podcast. And it's been great to hear from you. And if you do want to find out a bit more about all of this, again, click on some of the links we'll pop on the show notes. And if you want to follow us on socials, just Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate you watching the podcast today.
Thank you for listening to the Style for Life podcast. Don't forget, you deserve to feel fabulous at every age, every stage, and at every size. If you're loving the show, hit subscribe and leave a review. It helps more amazing people like you find their way back to life through style. Thanks again. Until next time.